We'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome everybody to another Landgate webinar. Happy to have you. For some of the returning folks that have gone through and looked at some of our other webinars, you may know this is an ongoing series. So every couple of weeks we host webinars primarily focused at property owners, real estate professionals, things like that, to really get out information for these folks of some of the data layers and things that we offer on Landgate. This is what you're seeing here on my screen, landgate.com. Going to go over a quick summary of what you can do as a property owner or real estate professional using Landgate, but we focus on land use and natural resources. So today we're going to be focusing on a very interesting topic, data centers. And we have one of my colleagues with me here, Mehrbano. She's going to introduce herself here in a little bit and take you through a high-level discussion of what data centers are, why they're important, why you may be hearing discussions amongst you, your family, your community, about these new data centers that are coming in. So these are educational. These are not for sales purposes. These are really to try to get as much information out to you, the property owners, that we can. And if you've been on these webinars before, you know that it's a very open forum. So at any time during the presentation, feel free to submit a question. You can see that down in the bottom there will be a chat section there or a Q&A. Go ahead and feel free to put any kind of questions in there. We'll try to answer those real time. If we don't get to them in the webinar, we will email you and we'll respond to you. So feel free to submit those questions. Also, if you have any questions about or any questions that you don't want answered live or public, feel free to go ahead and still submit those in and we'll reach out to you privately. Jordan and Michaela are on the background here, so they're going to be adding some chats in there, some resources and links. They'll add a link there for all of our previous webinars. If you want to go and look back at solar energy or oil and gas or any of those other types of resources, you can go ahead and look through our library and catalog there of previous webinars. They'll also put a contact information there if you want to email some questions directly to have us address those and get them back to you. We certainly can do that. But for quick introductions, my name is Craig Kaiser. I'm the president and co-founder of Landgate. I've been playing an integral role here at Landgate for the last 8 years, driving the vision and things like that, especially focused around the marketplace. So happy to be with you today. More exciting, I have Mehrbano here. Mehrbano, would you like to give a quick background?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mehrbano. I'm a product analyst here at Landgate, and I'm just here to have a conversation about data centers.
Awesome, great. Well, and like I said, please feel free to, you have an expert here on the phone or on the call with you all. Leverage her knowledge and resources and feel free to ask her questions. Before we get into the data centers, I'm going to give you a quick overview of Landgate. What is it we do and how can you use this for potentially making some more revenue on your property? We are an analytics platform in a marketplace. So we don't make money off of listings. There is no commission with you posting properties on Landgate. We do not sell your data to other real estate agents or brokers, anything like that. We do connect you directly with potential people who want to buy the property or either want to lease the property. So they don't call us, they call you directly. It is a for sale or for lease by owner type marketplace. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into, and I'm not sure, Mehrbano, let me know if I'm sharing my screen correctly. I'm going to jump over and go over to the mapping application. Let me know if you can see that. Are we still good? Awesome.
Yes,
good. Awesome. Well, I'm going to show you, you don't have to be subscribed to use Landgate to see any data, anything like that. But we do have a $10 a month subscription. It's called Land App. Jordan and Michaela will probably put a link to that on how you can get signed up for that. It's $10 a month. But you get access to nationwide ownership information and parcel level information. But on top of that, you're going to get an enormous amount of due diligence information. So this is an example you're seeing. This is live. This is on our actual production server here. So you're seeing, I zoomed into some random area in the United States and I can see parcel boundaries, outlines, things like that. But what's unique about Landgate, when you are clicking on a piece of property, it's actually going to load for you very quickly, as if you had an engineer or a scientist sitting next to you. It's going to load for you these value indexes where it's going to tell you what your relative land value is, relative solar value, wind, oil and gas, data centers, all of those things. But then it's also going to provide the data that backs that up. So when you run the analysis, you can go through, and I just click on the solar tab. I can go ahead and click on this buildable acres. It's going to give me a breakdown of my specific property. If I click on more parcels or things like that, I can go ahead and see that information. I can look at the electrical infrastructure information, zoom out and see all of that data. It's a really, really nice due diligence tool to learn about your property, learn about uh, the properties that are around you. I go ahead and click on this land layer. It's going to load what the land is being used for. And again, this is a nationwide data set. So you don't just get this in a single state or a single county. You do get this information across the United States here. So I can go ahead and look at my value indexes. I can look at my risk indexes, whether there's contamination on the site. Looks like this particular property here is fairly high risk for your electrical prices to be increasing over time. Then you have some weather catastrophe risks there. I have some parcel data here that you can get, and then again, a nice breakdown of the property features themselves. I can go ahead and print a report out very quickly and have a really nice summary of any property in the United States that you'd want to look at. So a really, really nice data due diligence tool there. Again, this is $10 a month nationwide. And then also on top of that, it is a marketplace. So a lot of MLS listings put their listings up on the marketplace. A lot of landowners, just like you, they utilize this marketplace for either highlighting their property, for either selling resources, selling the property, or for leasing resources and trying to generate revenue. Maybe they're interested in generating revenue from potentially getting a solar farm or a data center, or leasing out minerals, or leasing out their land for ag or recreation purposes. You can go ahead and create a listing up on this platform. It's your listing, you own it, you manage it, you delete it whenever you want. There is no commission or fee, but you can go ahead and leverage this tool as well and get your property out in front of folks that way. So that's the end of the overall summary of Landgate. We go into detail about how you can use some of these modules and things in previous webinars, but the reason why you are all here is to learn a little bit about data centers. So Mehrbano, I'm going to go ahead and toss it over to you and go ahead and share your screen. The presentation that Mehrbano is going to take you through, you will get a copy of that. That'll be emailed out to all of you. So no need to screen capture, take notes or anything. You will get a copy of this. So Mehrbano, go ahead and take it away. And you're on mute. I can't quite hear you, Mehrbano.
Sorry about that. For sure. Can you all see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
All right. So we're just here to tell you a bit about the importance of data centers, their relevance for the market, and why you should essentially put your land up for lease for data centers. So just to start off, what is a data center? Data centers are facilities that store, process, and assemble data. Think of it as a large building that has many supercomputers in it. And all of them are storing data relevant to the internet, relevant to the cloud, relevant to AI, right? There are a lot of different types of data centers, but the most common and the most popular three are enterprise, hyperscale, and co-location data centers. An enterprise data center is essentially a data center that is owned by the development company that wants to store their own data. These range from around 100 to 200 acres, and they store around 40 megawatts of power. These data centers would be around over a year. They would have at least the power equivalent to 20,000 houses. And think of a hyperscale data as an enterprise data. So in principle, it's owned by the company that wants to store their own data, but on a much larger scale. So these hyperscale data centers are around 400 plus acres, and they store north of 200 megawatts of power. And if you want to put that equivalent there, that's more than 50,000 houses of power a year. These hyperscale data centers are known to be campuses. So a lot of times they will span over multiple parcels of land, and they'll have multiple facilities. So for example, a data center campus can have offices, can have recreational facilities, and they have their major main data center buildings, right? The most popular type of data center is a co-location data center. These, think of this as an apartment complex for data centers. So it's one developer that makes the data center, but they lease out the space to other companies that want to store their data. And very briefly, like this can happen in one of two ways. Either the developer can provide you with the computer itself, or you as an external company can come in and bring your own computer too. But these are mostly like in urban areas. They are buildings that have multiple stories, and think of it just like racks and bunch of computers like within the same building, right? So these are smaller than 90 acres, and they can range from about 400 to 600 megawatts. It is rare that it is anything above 500 megawatts, but that's the general sort of co-location situation in the market right now. So let's see why these are important. So relevance
Hold
for
up,
property own. Uh-huh.
Mehrbano, before you move on from that, I think people uh, should understand some of those data points you were tossing out there. The amount of power, the megawatts that these locations are consuming. These are enormous consumers of energy. I heard you say that
Absolutely.
the enterprise, they would an enterprise level data center would consume roughly the amount of power that 20,000 homes would consume in a year. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So for those of you that this might be a new general topic, obviously something's going to go off in your heads like, holy cow, that is an enormous amount of power. And yes, it absolutely is a lot of power. Um, that's going to be something that we talk about the relevance to this to you to your property. You have to, for developers of these types of locations, you have to be able to access power and large amounts of power. Mehrbano is going to walk you through some examples here further on in the presentation of where certain pieces of property, historically very low value property, all of a sudden became extraordinarily high value, not because it was a beautiful place to put a new house or it was a nice place to go and put a log cabin and take pictures, but because it fit a criteria of some very, very specific site selection variables. The majority of that is how much power is available. So Mehrbano is going to take you through that, but again, she's getting into the relevance for property owners, and that's why some of the ears are going up from new property owners that a lot of these variables you need to be aware of, and you need to understand the implications on your property.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to echo what you said, Craig, a lot of our presentation is focusing on like what makes a good parcel of land for a data center, but majority of that is the power. Because data centers need to be running 24/7, and they're going to be holding a lot of power. And I'll come to the fact that hyperscale data centers are gaining a lot of traction in the market lately, but large campuses like 50,000 houses worth of power north of that even, that's a lot of power, and that's really important. But let's bring it back to relevance for property owners, right? So data centers are important to you as a property owner because not only, as Craig said before, do they increase your property value, but one of the major challenges for developers at this point in time is finding the perfect parcel of land. And that's something we'll cover later as well. But once you find that parcel, its value goes really high. And you can get really high rental income if you choose to either lease that or to sell that property of land, right? In addition to that, if you are building a data center on your parcel of land, or a data center is being built on your parcel of land, you are subject to a lot of state and local benefits. So a lot of times in some states, you have things like tax benefits and they slash off the property tax for you if you're building a data center on your land. And obviously you're connected to the larger scheme of economic development. It's a huge market, a lot of growth, a lot of points of opportunity. And it's something that a lot of people are going into as of now. So even if we see the United States, we have around 4,700 data centers on Landgate's database, right? And out of those, we have 119 that are planned and 176 that are planned for expansion. So out of the 4,700, we have around 300 projects that are still being built, which shows that a lot of companies are looking to expand their space and to build new data centers, right? A few more briefs about the US market. The United States data center market is the largest market for data centers in the world. It has a capacity of 16,000 megawatts in 2023, which is expected to grow more than double in size by the end of the next decade. So if you can see this little graph we have here, a lot of growth in the market. It's a huge market, a lot of development, a lot of new hyperscale projects that are going to be really popular now. And it also homes 8 of the largest data centers in the world and generated $123 billion in revenue just this year. So data centers, super hot, super important. And let's get into a bit of the details of them. So within the United States, we have Virginia, Texas, California, New York, and Florida, who are major players within the market. Virginia is home to around 450 data centers, and this is because of a multitude of reasons, but the largest being that there's an abundance of land and it is known to be the hub of internet traffic within the United States. So around 80% of the United States internet traffic goes through Virginia. Super hot spot for co-location services, for hyperscale and enterprise services as well. Texas, similarly, lots of abundance of land. California too, and New York and Florida. So you can see that over this trend, there are a lot of major cities. But I will also say, because hyperscale data centers are growing largely in number, rural areas have also started gaining lots of traction, because it is rare that you'll find like 600 acres worth of land in New York City, right? So in the rural areas, large market players are looking for parcels of land that span over 2 or 3 parcels, maybe 400 plus acres. They're looking to develop on that land, right? But let's look at the players themselves a little more too, right? We have our tech giants, very coffee table names: Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Meta. And they're same for the cloud service providers. AWS is Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. But the companies that have the most data centers in numbers are Lumen Technologies, Digital Realty Trust, Equinix, Amazon Web Services, and DataBank. So if you can see in this pie chart, we see that Lumen Technologies and other companies, they have a lot of quantity of data centers. So Lumen Technologies, I believe, has over 350 plus data centers in the US. So they are looking for even smaller parcels of land. They're looking at a variety of parcels or variety of types of land. And companies like this are also able to develop their own infrastructure related facilities, for example, things like fiber optic lines or transmission lines. And that's something that I'll describe and come to later. But they have huge capacity to be able to expand, grow, and develop data centers. So they're looking for any type of land to grow their data centers on, right? So we have property qualifications for data centers. What essentially makes your land suitable for putting it up for lease for a data center, right? The first is essentially buildable acreage. So obviously the portion of land that is suitable for the development of the data center. So like I mentioned, in hyperscale data centers, you have many, many, many parcels of land that are used for the campus, but essentially the buildable acreage will only cover the area that you have the data center on. And here we also go into a few factors like Craig showed on the land app, things like topography, things like, risk indices that we'll come to later, but essentially like things like elevation of the land, how suitable is it essentially to build a data center on? The second is available offtake capacity, but before that, I want to briefly explain substations. So a substation is an electrical facility that generates and transmits electricity, right? And from these substations, you have transmission lines, which are basically power lines that sort of move this electricity from one place to another. A good data center spot will be connected to a transmission line or have proximity to a substation, right? And the offtake capacity is essentially just how much power you can get from a substation. Again, these are important for data centers because you need to be running 24/7, and data centers use a lot of energy. So the closer you are to the substation or its line, the better it is for your parcel of land. Third, we have
Mehrbano, before you get into the fiber optic lines, let me jump in there really quick and just touch a little bit more on the substations there. A really good way to think about those substations, and you've all have seen these driving along the highway. They're the big kind of robotic looking things where you have the big transmission wires going into them. That's what we're calling a substation. When you think of the amount of power that these things use, or the amount of power that's coming away from a generation station or a power plant, these substations are the hub. That is where the power is pushed to. It's distributed into different lines. And for a decent analogy, you can kind of think of that substation as a electrical outlet in your wall, right? Some of these substations, they have an abundance of power, meaning that they're full. There's a lot of electrons there, meaning that they can actually probably take some electrons out of that location. And then if we shift gears very quickly here, because we're kind of on the same topic, you're talking about solar energy or wind energy or generating electrons. Some of these substations have the ability to accept more electrons. So again, it's a very, very large wall outlet. Same as your wall outlets, some of them are full of things and appliances, and you can push and pull electrons through that outlet. Substations are no different. They're just orders of magnitude larger with the amount of electrons that are flowing through them. So very, very critical. And this is something that we mentioned earlier on in the call. The implications for value on real estate for data centers, for battery storage, for solar, all revolves around that outlet. How much power is available? How much can you take out of that outlet? And how much can you push onto that outlet? Landgate runs the calculation, and this is for a different module and a different tool for a lot of transmission engineers and energy companies who use our data. We have calculated that, and we factor that into the indexes. When you click on a piece of property in Landgate and it comes up with an index score, a full engineering analysis has been done on that substation, what the cost of the energy is, where the energy is coming from, what the interconnection queue looks like, all of the very in-depth details. We have already done all of those calculations and appended that directly to the parcel. So it's an enormous amount of data that typically you'd have to hire an engineer to get some sort of relevance about the implications of that data. We provided that to you for every single parcel in the United States. So that's what Mehrbano was talking about there with the substation and the off-take capacity. And you might be close to a substation, but not every substation is built the same. Not every substation has it has the appropriate amount of electrons going through it to be able to push and pull off of. So we've done all of that work for you, but that is how in-depth the technical analysis is on all of these properties. So sorry, Mehrbano, go ahead and go into the fiber lines.
all good, all good. Yeah, just to echo that, again, like a parcel of land can be close to a multitude of substations, but the offtake capacity shows you which one is the best to pull energy from. And that's something that Landgate exclusively offers data about, but also something that heavily goes into consideration for choosing a parcel of land for a data center. Similar to substations, we have a fiber optic network, but these are essentially transmission cables for the internet and data networking. So think of it as like Wi-Fi for data centers, essentially. This is how data centers will store and transmit data across a network. And essentially, these are important because, again, data centers are storage facilities for data, and you need to be able to transmit that across companies. So, for example, I mentioned Lumen Technologies, right? They would be able to transmit data across specific areas through these fiber optic cables and be able to store them. So there are different types, and I won't bore you with the type, but we'll come to that later because they're presented as regional and long haul. But the difference essentially lies in the amount of data they can transmit over a distance, right? And we'll come to that later. But essentially, another factor that's important for choosing a parcel of land for a data center is water proximity. Because these data centers, in the simplest of terms, are just large buildings that have a bunch of supercomputers in them, they're naturally going to get very hot. Water is essential for the cooling of these data centers to make sure that no computers catching fire or they're not overheating. And on average, a data center will use gallons and gallons of water, right? For cooling for their HVAC systems. So the proximity to a water source is very important. And this either happens in two ways. The first being that the data center developer taps in to already existing water pipelines, or alternatively, they create and build their own. So for a lot of hyperscale projects, it's more likely that developers will come in like Microsoft, like Apple, like Google, for example, and they'll build their own water resource on the land. Google is, however, moving towards trying to be water free. So a lot of parcels that they have now started exploring are essentially close to water pipelines, but they also have reasonable amount of water storage in case of backup. So again, like the opportunity to put your parcel up for lease or sale for a data center is growing instrumentally, even if you're not being able to essentially tick all the boxes. So while they are very important and while they are crucial to choosing the perfect parcel of land, you might have some wiggle room to get away with a few things if you have a very large parcel of land and you get lucky enough to get Microsoft interested in it. But moving on, we have your redundancy source. So like Craig said, because power is so important, a lot of times data centers look for a redundancy or backup power. And this comes in many different forms, but think of it in the form of a power station or a gas plant or a coal plant, where you can essentially create power for backup for your data center. Proximity to these, again, is available within our platform, but at the same time, is really important for data centers to be able to function 24/7. If, unforeseen circumstances cause for any sort of reason power outage from the substation or the transmission line, your redundancy source is essential because the cost of downtime, so the cost of not running the data center, is very high. So this is an important factor. The last is renewable energy, sort of in the same vein. We're looking for parcels of land or a parcel of land that is close to a solar or wind farm is great. A lot of new data center developments are looking to power their data centers completely on renewable energy. Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon being the top three that are doing that. One interesting thing about developers like Apple is that they're looking for hyperscale parcels of land that they are building their own solar farms on. So the entire industry is moving towards something that would be essentially more efficient, but also energy friendly. And you're not using 50,000 houses worth of power in a year. So again, just on the point of these hyperscale data centers looking for a lot of land, here in this graph, you can sort of see that we have our major players: Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, and Apple. And ultimately, like the current power that's in purple, this is looking to almost be doubled with your planned power that's coming in here. And these major players are expanding at twice the capacity that already exists for them in hyperscale data centers. So that's something that's really growing really, really fast. The image to the left is these are data centers off of our database. But just to show you, these two data centers are essentially taking most of the boxes. So in blue right here, we have our blue fiber optic lines. So I'm just going to try to draw just real quick. So these are our blue fiber optic lines. They're going to transmit over smaller areas. They're going to transmit data over smaller areas, and your purple ones are regional fiber optic lines or long haul fiber optic lines, actually, that are going to do it over a large area of land. So the fact that they're connected to both, super plus. You have your solar farm right here, and you have your substations right here. So this is ticking most of the boxes you essentially need to have a good parcel of land or a spot for a data center development. Just an example, this is also in Richmond, Virginia. So huge hub, a lot of data centers are around the area, but we can get into more of like these examples right here. So just to remove my annotations, there we go. So we have this parcel of land that's available for lease on Landgate's platform, but the reason why we want to showcase it is because, like the data center I showed you before, this is ticking a lot of boxes. This is in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Craig can speak more about how it absolutely the area inflates in price because of the business environment, but this is in High Plains Business Park, which is growing out to be a very important and hot spot for data center development. It is essentially a data center park, a lot of companies. So this yellow little bubble we have here on the bottom, that is a Meta data center. To the right, and not shown in this image, we have a Microsoft data center, and we have a Lunavi planned data center. So a lot of traffic is coming into the area. You can see that we have our long haul and regional fiber optic lines. We have our substations here for electricity, and the red is the transmission line, so where the substations are branching out their power. This parcel of land is a really, really, really good parcel of land. It's super close to all of these areas, and it's ticking a lot of boxes as far as the importance of how hot it is or how likely it is that it's going to be used for building a data center. But Craig, if you have anything to say about this area, because I know that you know about the pricing and
Yep. Yeah. Two points to make here is, you notice this is in Wyoming. This is not Virginia. This is not California, Texas. Mehrbano showed a chart earlier on in the presentation where she showed the concentration of data centers across the United States. It does not matter what state you are in. It doesn't matter if you are in a rural area or in more urban area. Data centers are coming, and they will be in your county very soon, if not within the next probably 12 to 16 months, at least the permits and plans for them anyway. They're likely already happening. That's very, very similar to going back 8, 9, 10 years ago, and the conversations we would have with folks is like, okay, Craig, well, this is interesting. I'd like to make money on my property for solar energy, but there's just nothing going on in my area. That changed very quickly. This is the same thing. So it doesn't really, and that's the point I want to make. It doesn't really matter where you're at in the United States. If you have the variables that line up for your piece of property, you have power, access to fiber, and buildable acres, there's going to be interest and a significant amount of interest there. Second point here is, some of you might be wondering, hey, this is a really nice looking piece of marketing here for this individual's property. How can you get your property to look like this? Landgate does all of this. So this flyer that was put together, this was created by Landgate, by our analysts, by our technical team. The individual whose property this is paying nothing for this whatsoever. They listed their property. We identified it as a high value listing, and we can do that. We can do that. We do that for every single resource that's listed on the website. So whenever there's a high value listing for solar energy, wind energy, data centers, oil and gas minerals, whatever it is, we actually put together marketing material for that, and we get that out in front of those specific type of resource companies who are interested in those. So that's another thing that Landgate does for landowners. We do that at no cost. But that is the special thing about our marketplace. That's a big question we get from almost every webinar we do. Landowners coming in and saying, or even real estate professionals coming in and saying, okay, well, I think I have a high value piece of property for whatever the resource is. I only know one or two people in the business. I'm not afraid. I'm kind of afraid I'm not going to get a good deal. That's what makes Landgate's marketplace very nice, is that you don't have to know a lot of folks. It's going to go out into an open marketplace. Everybody who wants to produce those types of properties are going to see that listing, and then there'll be a competitive process. So that's one point I want to make there. But again, just a phenomenal place there in Wyoming, where you never would have thought. This is almost turning into the new Silicon Valley. At least it's powering the Silicon Valley. The reason why, there's a very large coal plant just north of Cheyenne, Wyoming, produces some of the cheapest power in the United States. The coal's coming from Powder River Basin, goes straight into the Laramie River plant, and those big red transmission lines you're seeing there, bringing those very cheap, abundant, reliable electrons straight down to these enormous locations. That little yellow box there, that's $1 billion data center being built by, I believe that's Microsoft's, isn't Mehrbano, and Meta's is across the street. So it's coming in a big way. Make sure you're getting out in front of that. So go ahead, Mehrbano, go ahead and continue with the presentation.
Yep. So this is our second example that we have for you. Fantastic spot for data center development. Again, super, super close. This is in Texas, super close to your fiber optic lines. So you can see the blue and the pink over there. And then your substation transmission line. And then if you look slightly behind your substation right there, you also have a redundancy source right there. So again, this data center is ticking a lot of boxes. Texas is a really hot spot. Over the course of 2023, it was the fastest growing market for data centers within the United States, gaining a lot of traction. And something that we'll come to later, that I know that there are a few concerns about land in Texas, but that's something we'll talk about later. Despite it being, hot and arid climate, it's gaining a lot of traction despite that. So yeah, next on to challenges to data center development. The market does face a bit of backlash as far as like some restrictions are concerned. So what happens if you're not ticking all the boxes? And what happens if you're close to a substation, but you're not close to a redundancy source, right? Energy infrastructure is one of the challenges that they face. Again, it takes around $300,000 for downtime costs per hour if a data center stops running. And obviously, this is not going to be cost to the landowners at all, but this is cost for the developers. So they want to make sure that they're able to run their data centers 24/7. And in an expanding market, pulling in energy from the grid is becoming increasingly difficult. But at the same time, like you see that hyperscale developers, they're growing towards building their own substations, building their own solar farms. They're coming up with solutions as to how to curb this, right? The second is site scarcity. So what happens if, you can't find the right parcel of land? But again, this is something that developers are looking towards. If you're ticking more than half of the boxes, your land essentially qualifies. If you have power, if you have water, if you have redundancy, if you have fiber optic lines, you're good to go to put your land up for grabs for a data center development, right? But the thing about this is, because land is so scarce, developers are very interested in finding the parcel, and they're willing to pay whatever price they can for that parcel of land. Which is why, for example, Craig was talking about the Meta data center earlier. The parcel of land that was essentially sold, it was sold for marginally more than it was actually bought for. And maybe Craig can tell you a bit about the pricing, but it was kind of just like, your property will probably double at least in value if you qualify for the needs that the developer needs for the data center, right? Craig,
I'll touch. Let me jump in there really quick. I won't give it pretty high confidence on a number. I won't give any details of where it was at or what part of the country where it was at. It was and this is why you need to know what you're sitting on, and you need to look at your property through different lenses. Maybe it's not a great site for a data center, but it's really good for solar. Maybe it's not good for solar, but it's really good for carbon credits. That's what Landgate allows you to understand. It provides you indexes of the quality of your property for solar wind, including data centers. So there is an index for data centers there, giving you a 0 to 100. How good is it? But there was a site that was sold in right around 2020, and it sold for around $500,000. That site was purchased specifically for a data center about 3 years later, for a little, I think it was a little over $20 million. So keep that in mind. If you do not know what is in your pile of sticks, you may be selling your pile of sticks for, there's a quote, and I don't know if anyone's seen the movie. In the movie, There Will Be Blood. You are either getting quail prices or you're getting oil prices. And that's a story from land flipping from early 1900s. This is very similar. If you do not know and you're not aware of what's going on in your property, you don't know the value propositions there, you could end up selling your property for $500,000, which $500,000 is a lot of money. But if it sells for 20 million 3 years later, you probably missed something there. So that's why we hold these webinars. I hate hearing about those. We are a significant resource for landowners and real estate professionals. Find out as much as you possibly can on the property that you're buying, selling, holding, things like that. But go ahead and continue, Mehrbano.
Yeah, so the third is climate concern. So, like I mentioned in the graph that I showed earlier, our major players included areas like Texas, California, and Florida. And it's no news to anyone that these areas are also at very high risk of natural disaster. So, what is the market essentially doing? For example, in Florida, if there's a high risk of flooding or a high risk of hurricane, data center developers are now looking at development that goes on to mitigate these risks in the form of alternative construction. So you have a raised data center, for example, for an area that is prone to flooding, or you have a data center that essentially has HVAC and AI cooling systems, for example, in Texas to avoid the arid climate. And specific construction materials are being used to avoid things like hurricanes. So while these risks exist, and Landgate is able to also tell you the risk of these natural disasters, these are things that you can or can be mitigated through development, right? There are ways around it, and since the industry is growing at such a fast rate, it is very less likely that these risks pose a very large threat to development of a data center on your parcel of land. The fourth is essentially scalability. Because the market is growing so fast, one of the most important things is the capacity to expand, or the ability to expand your data center into a large space. And while this doesn't essentially apply for co-location facilities, because those are more so in urban areas, and they have limited space of land, for enterprise and hyperscale data centers, scalability is a huge concern. With the market doubling in size, a lot of people want to have double the amount of buildable acreage, even if they just build on half. So that's something that you can also take into consideration. If you don't want to put all of the land for buildable acreage up on, maybe you do half for potential of expansion and half for building the data center. But obviously those are nitty gritties that you can figure out later. But scalability is a really important thing to take into consideration, considering that the market is growing really fast, doubling in load, doubling in revenue over the next 10 years. So here we are to address certain challenges, and Craig can probably speak a bit more about this. I'll hand it over to you, but these are a few initiatives that are going on to mitigate and be solutions to the risks outlined before.
Yeah, so this is one thing that it's especially in the time we're at in the year here, and some events that we have coming up in the next week. The data center component of the AI boom, all of those things is fairly apolitical. There are significant incentives coming in from the federal government. There will likely be also state and local incentives coming in. But as far as whether one side is liking or hating data center development and AI development, Like I said, it's very apolitical. So regardless what happens next week or the following weeks, this is something that is going to continue to come in a very, very big way. This is a tidal wave that's coming. And again, like I said earlier in the presentation, the sites that are going to be ideal for data centers are typically some of the real estate sites that aren't considered super high value. They're not your luxury properties. They're not your luxury ranches, things like that. These are going to be areas where there's been maybe historically some contamination issues, what we would call brownfield sites. These would be former landfills, things like that. So this is going to be reuse of certain areas, and there are some government folks on the call. We work heavily with state, local, and federal governments, helping them get their properties out in front of folks. This is something for them to consider if they have sites like that and they want to generate revenue, and it doesn't fit for a lot of different types of real estate development. This could be something that could create significant revenue in those cases. Typically, you do not see a lot of leasing from private land for data centers. You just see as direct acquisition of that land. Whereas on the government side, you will see a little bit more of that leasing versus buying scenario there. So you kind of got to balance that depending on what side of that equation you're on, whether you're a government land asset holder or you're a private fee landholder there. And then on the index scores here, again, like we mentioned before, Landgate is a very, very good tool to go through and screen. And for that $10 a month subscription, you can do this for any property. I do this constantly on properties that I'm purchasing personally for myself. I do not even consider thinking about moving forward with any property before I look at the actual index scores. Click on the property, and there you can get an understanding where you have value on the property, and then where you actually have some risks as well. So phase one type contamination, you see there on this example you're seeing there on the right, that industrial contamination fairly high. I probably, if I'm in a residential or commercial type real estate transaction, I may never know that until a very savvy buyer comes and I'm trying to sell that piece of property. So I can find that out right away. I can actually dig into these index scores using Land App. I can dig into actual listings and I can find out value and risk indexes on all the listings on Landgate as well. Here's another example of, we have, this is, I believe Jordan linked it in there. It's a really, really nice resource for leasing property and what to know, what questions to ask, things like that for data centers. Again, we've made one specifically about Wyoming because it seems to be the place to be. Cheap energy, a lot of land, things like that. And there was a question earlier on from Roy, and I appreciate the question coming. We're going to get some questions here in a minute. Do we have any data centers in Colorado? We do. This is no different than anywhere else. There's a heck of a lot more coming, is what I'll say there. So Mehrbano, do we have any more slides, or we
just to jump in on this real quick. So on our website under news and resources, you can find leasing property for data centers in any state. We're filtering these out. We're sending these out state by state, and these are packed with information about what you need to do to put your land up for lease, what benefits are available to you in the area, what restrictions you need to take into account. So it covers a lot, and it is state by state. So you can access these on our news and resources tab on our website. But yeah, that should be about it, Craig, and we can go to questions. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go ahead. And one that we typically get, this one's from Enrique. Enrique, I appreciate your question. What is the ideal distance to a substation? What I would say is the ideal distance is sitting right next to the thing. Now, is that going to be a really nice, beautiful piece of property? It's probably not. Historically, those are going to be your pieces of property that are isolated. They're vacant lots. There's transmission lines running all over them. They're not good-looking sites, but they're exactly what you'd be looking for not just data centers, battery storage. So these big battery storage locations. That's an ideal scenario. That's an ideal location. Solar energy, anything that is going to be producing electrons or needing a lot of electrons. With the topics we've just been discussing, you want to be right next to that substation. The further away you are from the substation, this is any size of parcel, any type of parcel, the further you are away from that substation, the more it starts eroding the economics of that site, because they have to get a trunk line, they have to get a line from wherever they're either generating the electrons or pulling the electrons back to that outlet, right? You have to run a long extension cord to get there. So that's something to consider. The closer you are to the substation, the better. Somebody had a question earlier on about the co-location, the amount of megawatts that they generate. That was a greater than 90 acres. So at a minimum, for those co-locations, those larger sites, you're going to need to have 90 acres. And those are, again, pulling very, very large loads. Now, one thing I do want to say on that, 90 acres, that's a big lot. That's a lot of land. Very few people have 90 acres. Okay. Solar development started in a very same one, where they wanted very large pieces of parcels, huge projects. My personal belief is that I think ideally to start out, people are going to want to make these enormous data centers. What I think we're going to probably see develop over the next 5 to 8 years is something that's happening right now in solar, where instead of having these massive, enormous projects on the exact perfect piece of land, they're actually making smaller projects on land that may not have worked for a 1,000-acre project, right? So I think you're probably going to start seeing that when it comes to getting your property out in front of these folks. What I recommend to folks using Landgate is, if you're trying to generate revenue from any of the topics we talked about, list it for all of those different topics. Put it out there in the marketplace, and you're going to find out whether it's irrelevant what I think the quality of that listing is. It's what the developers think of it, right? So when I put properties out there of my own to lease, I check all the boxes. Let's see what the market will bring back to me. So that's one thing I'd recommend there. If you're interested in it, put a listing out and see what it does. Test the waters. Isaac had a good question. Can you provide solar energy as a power source to a data center location? The answer is that yes. So Landgate, we dig into every interconnection queue, everything. So we know exactly the power makeup of what's coming in for the electrons. Mehrbano's at a great point of the redundancy. These data centers cannot go down. Obviously, the sun is not shining all the time. The wind isn't blowing all the time. So these data centers have to be backed up with consistent power, which is why you're seeing now they're turning on 3 Mile Island, they're going back to some more traditional energy sources. Doesn't mean they're going away from solar wind at all. If anything, they're ramping that up big time, but they're backing it up with some other resources. Okay, so you will see that sometimes. You'll see a data center or a battery storage facility wind with a larger solar or wind development. You're going to continue to see that moving forward, I think. Larry
Greg, if
has
I could just
yeah,
jump
Mehrbano,
in
go ahead.
right there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I
Please do.
just wanted to add that for solar farms, you know, a lot of companies are going to incorporate them within their data center infrastructure. So a lot of larger companies, they're offloading. So half of them are substations, half of them are solar farms. And if so, in the question you mentioned, if so, how large a solar farm is necessary? That is depending on the capacity of the data center. So, for example, Apple is known as a company that makes their own solar farms. So they build their solar farms next to their data centers, and it is per megawatt according to how much data they want to store within that specific data center. So it depends, it varies, but a lot of companies are now growing to be more green and looking at renewable energy as an alternative power source. Go ahead.
Very good. Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Jesse, you have a question. I appreciate it. Very good question. This webinar has been targeted really for landowners and real estate agents. When it comes to your question of how do developers of these resources use the Landgate tools, we do have another series of webinars that we posted, and Jordan and Michaela can go ahead and pull that in. The tool that you saw here and that I demoed earlier, that's our land app tool. It's aimed primarily the amount of data analytics and in-depth technical data that's out there is targeted more for folks like me, landowners, real estate professionals who need to get a general score of should I be aware of this value or not. Mehrbano had a couple of screen captures in there of some very in-depth technical data where you can actually go into every interconnection queue. You can dig into what projects are available, more of an engineering and analytical tool that a lot of the resource developers use, a lot of more of the large real estate investment groups use. And they use it for the, just like your question said, they use it for forecasting out potential revenues for acquisitions. If they're looking purchase, they run that through the tool. They run that through the Landgate tool. We're happy to connect with you and get you some more information on that to go ahead and screen and scope what potential values could be there. And then the technical details of some really in-depth bankable type reports from a pro forma statement perspective, things like that. So we can get you some more information on that. That's taking it up a couple of notches on the technical perspective. Try to get through a couple more questions here. I appreciate it. Looks like everybody's staying on, so I really appreciate it. Kevin had a question about the rental rates. Keep in mind what type of property you're talking about there, Kevin. If it's private fee, like just private land, you're probably not going to be in a lease perspective there. You're probably going to be more in a sale perspective. Now, hopefully you've identified and the buyers are being forthcoming that they're a data center, they want to develop into a data center. If that's the case, you are going to see a very, very sizable increase of what you think that land value is worth. Like I said, I gave you that data point earlier on in the call. But if you're a government asset holder, you're probably going to be in more of a lease scenario there. So just consider which side of that equation you're on. And Larry had one last question, so probably be the last one unless someone wants to fire one in here at the end. Is the fiber data available in the standard Landgate subscription? On the $10 a month Land App subscription, no, it's not. It's not in the Land App subscription. However, you will get the information on your individual property when you generate a property report. So it will tell you how close you are to a fiber line, some details on that. So we do provide that information. It's a very expensive data set that we're pouring a lot of resources in. We have more digitized fiber line data across the United States than any other data developer out there. So we're very proud of it, but it's very expensive. So looks like we're getting a couple more here at the end. Isaac has another question. Is it a big factor for companies if the land is far away from a city or close by? From what we've seen, it doesn't really matter. They don't need to be close to a city. They need to be close to some of the variables Mehrbano mentioned before. Fiber optic lines, I mean, those beams of light are traveling at the speed of light. So it doesn't really matter the distance there. It's not really even relative. As long as you have power, as long as you have buildable acres, and as long as you have proximity to those fiber lines and water is becoming a very, very big issue. You have access to water, then you're in a good situation there. Last one here before the top of the hour. This one's going to come in from Darren. Arizona is prime. Is Arizona a prime spot for data centers? And he's got some property there, and we'll get back to you. We'll share private information there. But yeah, like I said, is it a prime spot? I would say that there really is no prime. This is exactly where people want to be. Historically, and what Mehrbano said, Virginia that's been the prime spot. But that's changing. That has just been the place where developers have started. This is coming across the United States, and I would say Arizona is certainly going to be no exception to that. And then looks like one of our early users here, Trey, jumped in. And Trey, great to see you, man. Thanks for making it on the call. Alternative cooling systems for areas that don't have as much water resources. I'd say yes, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Mehrbano, do you want to touch on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of companies are integrating AI technology to make sure that their efficient water systems are operating properly, but also companies like Google, they're trying to go completely water free by the end of the year. And that's obviously a huge step because you need some sort of ventilation within the data center itself, right? But companies are definitely doing that. They're exploring that. They're integrating AI into the space, but also they're coming up with alternative cooling methods. I won't get too much into the technicalities of that, but that is definitely something that they're working towards, especially in California, for example, because um, the state is already scarce in water as a resource, but it is one of the growing markets. A lot of innovation is coming in. A lot of alternatives to water is coming in the form of HFAC cooling systems. So if you want to have a look at some Google data centers for alternative water cooling methods, that would probably be a great place to start looking.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for hanging in there with us. We made it all the way through the top of the hour. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to answer any questions that if you didn't want to ask them in public, not a problem at all. Send them in. We'll get them back to you. You will get a recording of this webinar and you'll get the presentation as well. In the meantime, any other additional questions, feel free to reach out to us at Landgate. Appreciate everybody's time. Mehrbano, great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.